Welcome and settle in. Imagine yourself stepping quietly into a wide green valley where hills fold over one another like soft blankets, where the air feels hushed in a way that makes your shoulders drop, and where the usual buzz of modern life gently fades until it is just a memory. In this place, you do not shout across distance to be heard. You listen. You notice a kind of comfortable stillness, the way you notice the soft weight of a comforter on your legs. This is a radio quiet zone, a place shaped by the careful, calm discipline of listening to the universe, and by the equally calm discipline of leaving certain conveniences behind, so that the faintest whispers from the sky can be heard. If the pace of your day is fast, if your hands seek your phone without thinking, you might not last a day here. But for now, you can simply imagine yourself here and let the quiet hold you like a gentle tide. If you enjoy sinking into this kind of slow science, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to drift deeper, there is a playlist in the description that will keep the learning flowing softly while you fall asleep. How sleepy are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Imagine standing at the edge of a meadow at first light. The grass is wet with dew, each blade carrying a bead of water that turns the morning into tiny mirrors. The air smells like cool leaves and damp earth, a smell that settles you as surely as a long exhale. The hills have the rounded, worn look that comes from time and weather, their slopes dressed in forests that keep their own slow rhythm. Somewhere beyond the trees, a great pale dish waits, tilted slightly toward the sky, quiet as a sleeping animal. It is a radio telescope, and though it is made of steel and cable and precision, it has a softness about it when you see it from a distance, as if it is simply another flower opening to the sun. In a radio quiet zone, there are rules, gently but firmly kept, that bring a deep calm. Devices that shout into the air do not operate here. The phones that are usually in our pockets become polished stones we leave in a drawer. Wireless routers are silent. Cars designed for convenience take a step back. And engines are chosen for how little electrical noise they make. Microwaves keep their doors closed during critical observations. The language of the place becomes slower and lighter because there is less to compete with the ear. The landscape itself helps. Mountains hold back distant signals the way thick curtains soften a bright window. When the wind moves through the pines, it masks nothing. The silence needed is a silence that carries the faintest of breaths from stars and gas clouds, from planets and the space between them, across a gulf of time, and lays them down in the receiver as softly as dust settles on a bookshelf. Imagine walking a path that leads to the big dish. The path crunches slightly beneath your shoes, tiny pebbles shifting a little, a sound that feels like it belongs in the world here. The air brushes your face. A fence line carries small signs, not stern, but clear. They remind you to keep the pocket-borne transmitters switched off, to let the watches tick quietly, to live for a while without the little comfort of a constant connection. The signs do not scold. They invite you into a different rhythm. The buildings you pass are practical, painted in colors that blend with the fields. A door opens, and a wave of cooler air touches your skin, faintly metallic, touched with the smell of electronics and machine oil and something very clean, like a laboratory that has been kept in good order. In the control room, There is a glow, not harsh, but steady. Screens show the sky as numbers and graphs, bands of color moving slowly as the telescope scans through frequencies. The people here speak in soft voices, not out of fear of disturbance, because acoustical sound does not bother the radio receivers, but because their work draws them inward, and because the culture of the place is one of care and gentleness. They watch for deviations in a spectrum, a tiny line that might mark neutral hydrogen at 1420 megahertz, or a molecular whisper from a cloud of gas so thin you could travel through it for a light year and never meet a solid particle. They drink tea that steams in mugs with gloved hands sometimes. They look at the logbook, they write carefully, and they move through the room like people in a library where the joy is in the quiet. Imagine yourself slowly approaching the structure of the telescope. The greens and browns of the valley fold into the pale geometry of girders and cables and the gentle concavity of the dish. The surface panels are clean and faintly dimpled, like the skin of a calm lake ruffled by a very light rain. The dish is so large that it absorbs your sense of scale. You look up, and yet it does not feel oppressive. Rather, it feels like a giant white flower, turned toward the sky to collect the faintest drizzle of energy and guide it down toward a focus, the way a leaf guides a raindrop along its veins. The wind touches the ribs of the structure and sets up a hum so low your bones barely know it is there. Motors are so well made that when they turn the dish, it moves slowly, gently, with a patience that feels like weather rather than machinery. At the focus, receivers sit inside a protected structure, layers of shielding and cooling like blankets against unwanted warmth and noise. The receivers are not chilled for comfort. They are chilled so that their own atoms do not disturb the faint messages they are there to hear. Noise, in the sense that an astronomer means it, is not the kind that shakes the walls. It is heat and randomness, the agitation of electrons, the tendency of everything in the universe to murmur a little if it is not made very still and very cold. The receivers drink liquid helium or are linked to cryo-coolers that hum at a pitch that recedes into the background after a few breaths. Inside those housings, whisper-thin signals are amplified by devices designed to barely exist as far as the sky is concerned. To be so unassuming, they are like listening cupped hands rather than microphones. Imagine a slender cable carrying information down from the focus, along trusses that cast thin shadows, into electronics that turn analog ripples into digital bits. The flow feels steady like a stream that knows the bends of its path. In the digital processing room, air is moved with a precision that keeps components comfortable. Fans murmur, but there is careful attention to their electromagnetic quietness. The data does not rush. It moves with that same unhurried pace, gathered and combined, its subtle variations teased apart with algorithms that are more like gentle filters than heavy hands. A fast Fourier transform, the mathematical operation that turns a ripple in time into a note in frequency, unfolds again and again as if a harp were being plucked and analyzed in a way so tender the instrument never vibrates, and yet its notes are known completely. You might think of the radio sky as a sheet of darkness, but here it is full of texture. There are bright knots where matter fell into dense gravity wells long ago, creating galaxies that send out radio waves from jets that stretch light years. There are arcs and wisps where supernova shock fronts sweep up gas and dust, turning them into giant shells. There are the soft, wide fields of the Milky Way's disk, where the glow of electrons spiraling in magnetic fields, a process called synchrotron emission, smooth and deep, drapes across the receivers like a steady, quieting rain. There are sharp little lines where particular atoms and molecules leave their marks. The neutral hydrogen line at 1420 megahertz is like a steady heartbeat in the tranquil background, a spectral line so important that entire zones of the spectrum are kept protected for it. Ammonia whispers in a cluster of lines. Hydroxyl, formaldehyde, methanol in their various meso states in star-forming regions where gas is pumped by gentle collisions and radiation in a way that makes it coherent, a natural laser in the radio, so bright and yet still just a drip of energy compared to the clamor of a city. Imagine running your finger along a map of the Milky Way made only of hydrogen at 21 centimeters. Imagine the spiral arms that are nearly invisible light for those of us inside the galaxy, but become bold and lightly textured in radio, like a fossil rubbing where the shapes of leaves are imprinted. Imagine drifting quietly between arms, counting clouds that are not really clouds, but regions slightly denser than what surrounds them, places where gravity and chemistry are negotiating the patient birth of stars. The discipline that keeps a radio quiet zone quiet is in service to that patient negotiation. It is a promise made by many people to the idea that, for a while, this valley will be a bowl, holding a stillness that lets those negotiations be recorded. Beyond this valley, there are other places with similar rules and similar quiet. In the wide open of Western Australia, there is a remote plain where a future instrument is being shaped, a place where the ground is red and the air is dry. And the distances between houses are long enough that you feel a hush simply from solitude. The Murchison region was chosen not because there is nothing there, but because what is there is an empty city of the radio spectrum. There, the voices that matter are old and dim, and the rules keep the new loud voices away so that ancient conversations can be heard. In South Africa's Karoo, a similar decision was made. Time seems to pass differently in such places where the loudest thing is the wind across a low shrub. The sky is big there, and at night, the Milky Way lies across it like a thin scarf. Back here, imagine the day unfolding at the telescope. Morning starts before dawn for some. A technician checks logs, pulling up plots of system temperature, making sure the curves drift lazily where they should. A glance at radio frequency monitors tells whether a nearby farm has forgotten an old electric fence charger that sprays little spikes, or whether a lightning storm over the hills is skipping signals like stones over a lake. A truck with a diesel engine rolls slowly from a maintenance building, its headlights dim, its engine well shielded, a vehicle chosen not for speed, but for the quietness of its sparkless ignition and its good manners in the electromagnetic neighborhood. The driver smiles at a colleague and points at the sky, no words needed. The mail here might come later than in the city. Internet arrives in fibers, buried along road shoulders, carefully filtered at the edges, coaxed into compliance with a web of rules that keep its radio leakage low. The people who keep those fibers running know the stakes, and so they tape carefully, they route neatly, they check bends and connectors with as much concentration as musicians tune their instruments. In the cafeteria, breakfast is simple. Scrambled eggs on a quiet morning taste like the kind of food you make when your mind is untroubled, and a mug feels good in your hands. Conversation is easy, nothing urgent, more shared glances at the schedule, and appreciation for a window of good weather. The telescope does not want wind too strong. The dish is a giant sail, and it leans into weather only to a point. Engineers know each limit, but the day is calm. Equipment scheduled for calibration is nudged gently through its paces. A noise diode, a component made precisely to inject known amounts of noise, clicks in controlled pulses. Those pulses test whether the amplifiers hear what they should. A source in the sky known to be steady, a quasar that has been measured and measured again, is pointed at, and the telescope takes a breath, compares, nods. The schedule is made to allow for this. The schedule is made by people who know that patience is a form of intelligence and who trust that the sky will be there tomorrow too. Imagine looking over the shoulder of an astronomer working with pulsars. Pulsars are neutron stars that spin and send out beams that sweep across space like lighthouse beams. Their pulses arrive so regularly that they can be used as the tick-tock of cosmic clocks. The signals are faint, like hearing a spoon tap, tap, tap on the other side of an enormous wall, but they are regular. The computer folds the pulses, stacking them so that what is random washes out and what is periodic stands taller. The result is a profile, a little hill of energy that repeats with amazing steadiness. Some of these objects spin many times in the time it takes you to inhale. Some spin slower. All of them are relics of stars that exploded, now small and dense and steady in their way. A network of such pulsars can even let us know about slow waves in space-time, a background hum of ripples that takes years to crest and trough, recorded because the pulses arrive a tiny bit earlier or later than usual, in a pattern that whispers of a wave passing through everything. The culture of a radio quiet zone is one of kindness to quiet. It is revealed in small signs, a notice in a lobby that says thank you for using wired connections, a cabinet lined with copper mesh to protect a particularly sensitive instrument, a cardboard shield that someone built to keep a land port from radiating more than it must. The ground near some labs is bare of fine gravel because even the small spark of static electricity from shoes skimming pebbles was noticed and measured and dealt with politely. There is a shared memory of unexpected sources of interference. A security camera was once found to be chatty at a frequency that a researcher needed. A gate motor talked too loudly. A microwave oven, old and worn around its seals, sang too brightly at a slice of spectrum that carries that steady hydrogen heartbeat. People remember these stories and smile the way you smile about a learning moment, not about a crime. Solutions are found, parts are replaced, shielding is added, and silence returns. Within the control building, there are rooms that feel like sanctuaries. One room might be a Faraday cage, not for isolation, but for cleanliness of signals. The walls are made of copper, The seams carefully soldered, the door heavy and solid, the latch closing with a satisfying clunk softened by rubber. Inside equipment is tested so that its whispering is on the right side of the line. When the door is closed, your phone would be blind. In another room, absorptive foam lines the walls in pyramids, and an echoic chamber where reflections are tamed down to nothing, where radio waves enter and are absorbed like rain into dry soil. The floor gives a little under your feet in a way that feels like walking over a field of thick, firm grass. The spectrum has its own geography here. There are bands set aside and shared. Some are reserved for astronomy, little parks in the city of wireless use. Others are shared with weather radars and satellites that serve many people. Agreements exist that permit astronomers to work even when neighbors are noisy, because there are ways to filter and notch, to knot and subtract, to patiently record in a way that leaves the signal behind and ushers the rest away. The International Telecommunication Union has a table of allocations that looks at first like a forest of numbers, but is in fact a treaty book that lets human activities coexist. Astronomers know where their quiet corners are, and regulators and engineers work together to keep those corners clean. When a new service arrives, like a constellation of satellites that promise connection to the edges of the world, there are long conversations about how to share. Filters are designed that reject the glare of satellites while letting the sky through. Schedules are adapted so that when the brighter parts of the sky, full of satellites, pass overhead, observations switch to tasks that care less about those frequencies. Sometimes the sky grows a bit noisy all on its own. The sun has moods, gentle and slow ones most days, lively ones sometimes. Solar flares can fill the receivers with activity, and the spectrograms grow bright with stripes and patches as if someone had played with watercolors. These are not intrusions. They are the sky's own voice, and there are people who listen to that voice to understand the space weather that flows toward Earth. Jupiter, too, can rustle at radio frequencies, especially when Io's plasma torus interacts with its magnetic field. The sound, transposed to audio for human ears, can be a soft hiss or a shower of seeds scattered on a drumhead, lightning all over the world. Billions of strikes a year sends very low-frequency radio waves that creep along the surface of the planet and bounce between ground and ionosphere like a sound reverberating in a long hallway. In the lowest frequencies, careful instruments hear a global hum that emerges from those flickers, and some people measure it like a planetary heartbeat. Imagine a quiet walk in the late morning. You step out of the cool of the lab and into sunlight that has gathered strength only in a measured way, nothing harsh. The breeze moves through the meadow in long swells, turning the seed heads so they gleam and then dim. You hear the faint burr of the telescope's motors as it slews toward a new target. That sound has a comfort. The way the sound of a refrigerator humming in the night can feel like proof that a house is working. The dish moves so slowly you cannot see it move directly. But if you look at the same corner of its rim and then look again a minute later, you notice the change. A small bird passes, wings making soft clicks. Somewhere nearby, a screen door closes as someone goes to fetch a manual that has been kept updated for years. Pages corners slightly frayed, notes added in neat handwriting. Near midday, data flows continue, An astronomer hunting molecules in a cold, dark cloud tunes to frequencies that are like little milestones along a road. Each molecule has a fingerprint. Ammonia lines allow temperature to be inferred from the relative strength of the transitions. A spectrum with little peaks becomes a thermometer for a cloud so distant it might be hard to even draw it with a pencil. The idea that temperatures and densities and motions can be known for places that are not only far but untouchable by hands feels like magic. It is not magic, only patience and the application of simple physics with a lot of careful averaging and subtraction. The molecules spin and tumble, and the rules of quantum mechanics allow only certain steps in their little arm dances. Those steps emit photons at exact frequencies, and when enough of them do it together, a line rises in the spectrum like a hill in a landscape, gentle-sided, steady-topped, and the scientist smiles and notes the red shift that moves it slightly from where it would be in the laboratory. Elsewhere in the building, a group working on pulsars steps away to stretch. They look at the clock on the wall, not a loud ticking thing, but a digital clock disciplined by a hydrogen maser. The maser is itself a quiet device, a little fountain of stable time that keeps everyone in sync. With time this good, the pulses can be measured to microseconds and better, and little wobbles in arrival times can suggest a planet tugging or an interstellar cloud passing or a long wave in space-time. The discipline of quiet attends to time as carefully as it attends to the spectrum. Signals come at their own pace. Deadlines are not like in other places. If a project needs another night, it will be given it if the weather and the schedule allow. Lunchtime comes. The cafeteria's window has a view of the dish and the way the light slides along its surface. Bread has a scent that is simple and satisfying, and soup is served in bowls that do not proclaim anything. Conversations drift over salad about calibration tones and focus offsets and the slow drift of the ionosphere during the day. There is talk as well about the woods, about a family of deer seen at the edge of the road, about a cloud that looked like something someone used to see in their first home. The people here are not fundamentally different from those in other labs, but their days ask for a different set of habits. They put phones in airplane mode without sadness. They carry pencils because they like the feel of graphite. They walk rather than drive because the distances are small and the steps are pleasant. They have learned the rhythm of this place the way a fisherman learns the rhythm of a tide. Afternoon brings the patient work of maintenance. A spare module is installed in a rack. The rack is grounded with a strap. The strap is tested with a meter. The reading is noted. Cables are tied into looms that have careful radius so that the shields do not crinkle. Connectors are tightened just so, not too tight, to avoid tiny fractures that could become little transmitters of their own if they carry small sparks in the night. After the module is installed, the noise temperature is measured again and the curve looks like a familiar friend. Outside, the sun warms the dish and the focus shifts by millimeters, enough for someone to trim the settings. The dish is a metal meadow, and like any meadow in sun and shade, it breathes and moves just a little. The engineers who designed it knew this, and they made it adjustable where it mattered. They made the quiet possible not by ignoring the world's subtle changes, but by accommodating them. Imagine resting on a bench in the shade and closing your eyes. You hear the delicate chorus of insects at the edge of the field, a repetitive sound that is like a gentle trance. You hear the very occasional distant roll of a truck on the highway far outside the zone. A sound so low and attenuated, it is more a feeling than a sound. You smell pine and faint machine oil and dust warmed by the sun. Your breathing falls into step with the place. If you imagine yourself living here for a day, you can imagine your shoulders, which are so often tensed by alerts and messages and tasks back to back, dropping and staying dropped. Your hands are free from the small glass rectangle that calls to them. In its place, you hold a field notebook with a soft cover and a page that takes pencil well. You write a few quiet notes. The gentle rhythm continues. The story of radio quiet zones is also a story of neighborhoods. The closest houses may carry 1 or 2 extra rules. Residents help by using wired internet rather than Wi-Fi. When they use a microwave oven, they are mindful in certain hours. They know that the dish in the meadow is a neighbor too, and it hears more than they do. In towns nearby, when a new business wants to set up a transmitter, there is a process of coordination. The people who handle that work do not say no without listening. They ask about purpose, about power levels, about antennas, about directions. They find ways to share the air that do not leave anyone out. Sometimes a transmitter is moved a little, or pointed downward, or limited to hours when it will cause no harm. Sometimes a filter is fitted that removes one slice of a frequency band so that a precious line is not masked. The process is paperwork, but underneath it is a culture that values coexistence and patience. Perhaps you imagine the radio quiet zone as a fortress. It is not exactly that. It is more like a garden with well-tended hedges and polite fences, with neighbors who remember to close the gate. Storms can blow branches down, and people can forget to latch things, and when that happens, someone walks over and lifts the branch and latches the gate again. There is a feeling of care that spreads beyond the telescoped grounds into the way people drive slowly past certain signs, into the way they take off baseball caps when they enter a building, as if it were a church, not out of fear, but out of respect for a space that is holding something delicate. When night approaches, the light softens, and the valley becomes all kinds of blue. The dish grows a little more subtle in the way it catches the last of the sun. The first stars appear, ordinary in that their light is always there, extraordinary in that every time you see them, they feel like old companions. Radio sees them differently. Some stars are radio loud, wearing coronas that crackle in ways that can be listened to with care. But most are quiet in the radio sky, except for their planets and their environments. The disk of the Milky Way rises and turns overhead, and the radio dish turns with it, a flower that never tires of following. Inside the control room, night shift comes on. The new team moves the chairs slightly differently and sets a new pot of tea. But the screens remain their steady glow. The night is good for radio astronomy because people have gone to bed and everything made by hands is a little quieter. The ionosphere changes too, sometimes becoming more stable. Targets scheduled for dark hours are often delicate. Cold gas in the outer parts of galaxies can only be seen when the background is as quiet as it can be. Integrations take hours. Data accumulates like snow, one flake at a time, until a drift forms that has shape. Looking at such a drift requires patience. The trick is to let your mind sit back from the fronts of the graphs and let the pattern come forward when it is ready. Imagine yourself now in a different place, a different quiet zone, one set not only by geography, but by frequency and technology. A network of small antennas in a field listens to the very low frequencies that tell stories about the early universe when it was just becoming transparent to light. At those long wavelengths, the earth itself is noisy, and the instruments must be far from cities. The antennas are not large like a dish. They are like simple metal shapes that could be built in a garage, arranged in patterns and connected to a system designed to find the faintest drifts when they align together. Interferometry, the joining of waves from different antennas so that their combined pattern is topped with tiny repeating patterns, is used. The interference pattern acts as a natural ruler across the sky, and with it, astronomers can bring into focus structures that are low in contrast but high in importance. The discipline here is more delicate because the frequencies are close to those used for broadcast and for other services. Avoidance is practiced and algorithms help. When people speak about radio noise, they often mean what you might think of as static in a speaker. In the control room, noise is a number, a temperature. Every step along the path from the sky to the bit adds a little. The dish gathers, the feed guides, the amplifier lifts the whisper to a murmur, and then the digitizer sets it down as a pattern of ones and zeros. The design of each stage is shaped by a desire to keep that added murmur small. Figures of merit like the noise figure and the system temperature become as familiar to a radio astronomer as resting heart rate or hydration might be to an athlete. And like an athlete, the system is warmed up slowly, checked carefully, and cooled down gently when maintenance is needed. You would not last a day in this place if your hands ached to text or scroll, if your voice craved a quick response and a faster pace. It is not that you would be punished. It is that you would feel a pull to do something that the place asked you not to do. And you would feel that pull again and again until you learn to let it go. The people who thrive here have taught themselves a different set of habits. They walk slower by choice. They set printed maps on the dashboard of a truck before a drive. They bring a book. They learn to enjoy the stretch of time between a thought and its completion. Imagine that as a comfort rather than a restriction. Imagine leaving your phone on a shelf by the door and walking out under the sky without a plan, and letting that feel like freedom. Many nights in a radio quiet zone include a little fog that rolls into the valley and gathers in low places. Fog does not block radio waves much at the frequencies used for many observations, but it changes the feel of the place. Sounds soften and distances shorten. The dish becomes a ghostly shape, a careful giant. Dew gathers on handrails, and the metal tastes like rain if you touch it. Somewhere, a door closes, and its sound is smaller than during the day. The control room feels like a lighthouse, though the light does not turn. People wrap in sweaters and lean closer to the screens. Sometimes a fox ambles along a fence line, pauses and looks, then continues. In one corner of the control room, a project that looks for fast radio bursts runs. These are brief, bright flashes of radio energy from far beyond our galaxy, milliseconds long, that arrive without warning. The system that listens for them is designed to be always ready. It looks at data in many possible dispersions because the dispersed signal arrives slightly smeared across frequencies due to the ionized gas it travels through. When a pattern emerges that looks like a candidate, a gentle alert appears, not a loud klaxon. People lean over and look. The data is recorded, saved for more careful study. These events are thrilling in some labs. Here, they are just part of the sky's language, something to be noted and appreciated and blessed with another entry in a log. Around midnight, the duty astronomer turns to a classic target, a supernova remnant, a shell of material expanding slowly into the interstellar medium, is traced at several frequencies. The variation between frequencies tells of electron energies and magnetic fields. The spectral index is measured by fitting a line in a log-log plot, a playful mathematical exercise that feels like drawing with a very light pencil. The result is compared to previous measurements, and the change is small, as expected. The universe is dynamic, but most of its changes are slow compared to our days. That slowness welcomes those with patience. The gentle rhythm continues. Even in a radio quiet zone, satellites are visible, points of reflected sunlight in the dark sky crossing in silence. They are part of modern life, and their transmissions can complicate certain bands. The people here have learned to plan around that. Schedules include knowledge of when certain satellites are overhead. When a satellite is bright in the radio at a band an astronomer needs, observations might pause for a few minutes or a different target might be chosen. Notches in the frequency, sharp edges carved by digital filters, are applied to remove the worm trails of satellite transmissions from spectrograms. The night accepts these adjustments as part of the flow. Imagine the morning again, this time in winter. Snow rests softly on railings, each flake a small miracle that goes unnoticed amid so many. The dish wears a dusting that will shed when it moves. Its motions are slower in the cold, deliberate, and careful. The control building is warm inside. Coats hang on pegs by a door, hats and scarves below them. The air smells faintly of wool and ozone. Observations in winter have different constraints. The air is drier, which can be good for higher frequencies. The ground is hard, which changes the sound of footsteps. People laugh softly when they shake snow from boots, and someone brings a tin of cookies from her home. Midday in winter is clear and bright. The dish tracks a galaxy in the local group looking for hydrogen in its outer reaches, rotation curves, which show how fast material at different distances from the center of a galaxy rotates, are measured this way. There is a gentle defiance in these curves, showing that the outer parts of galaxies move faster than expected, if only visible matter were present. Dark matter is invoked, not with fear, but with the calm acceptance of a placeholder for an unseen pattern that makes the math and the observations match. The quiet discipline of the radio telescope contributes to that picture, with one more curve plotted and one more set of points added to a shared graph as big as a research field. Inside the valley, a small building houses the spectrum management team. Their equipment looks like a musician's rig, with analyzers and oscilloscopes, with little antennas and short coax cables and devices that glow with neat lines and grids. Their job is to listen to the neighborhood and catch new voices early. They do not police like a force, they converse. If a new source appears that is not supposed to be there, they set out with a portable antenna and a directional receiver. They walk along roads slowly, watching a meter rise and fall as they point the antenna. They find a source, perhaps a rusty connection in a power line that has started to arc microscopically in wet weather. They call the utility. A truck comes. A line worker climbs a pole and tightens a bolt, and the noise is gone. The solution is practical and neighborly, and afterwards someone writes about it in a small newsletter because it is good to remember how such puzzles are solved. Humidity changes the radio landscape. On summer afternoons, the air holds more water, and some frequencies are absorbed a little more. Technicians notice a small dip in sensitivity around a known water line and nod. They adjust expectations and carry on. Heat shimmering over ground has no effect on radio waves the way it does on our light, so the dish can observe through a mirage without concern. Clouds can pass without limiting observations at lower frequencies. Rain is mostly a factor for higher bands, and when it falls, the dish sometimes takes a rest or turns to a target less affected. There is never a sense of being thwarted. There is a sense of adapting to the actual day and keeping the work pleasant and possible. At the edges of the radio quiet zone, signs tell visitors about the rules. The language is friendly. It explains that certain devices, when left on, can make listening to the universe harder than it needs to be. It recommends turning them off, not because someone is watching specifically, but because everyone is part of a shared agreement. Visitors often find the experience novel. The first few minutes without a phone can feel like an itch. Then, as the quiet settles, a different feeling arrives, one like the sound of a fan turning off in a room you did not know was making noise until it stopped. People who tour the dish come away with a sense that it is not a machine only, but a companion in the valley, a gentle neighbor with special needs that you are happy to accommodate when you understand them. Imagine the library in the late afternoon. Shelves hold books about spectrum management and astrophysics and engineering. There are copies of old theses with carefully drawn diagrams. A table holds a journal turned open to an article about a new receiver design. A window lets in light that warms the spine of a chair. Someone has left a note about a study group meeting, handwritten, taped to a corkboard. In the corner, a globe shows the world's radio observatories, points on continents that are small in number and large in importance. When you think about these places together, you can imagine a network of quiet bowls in the fabric of human noise, carefully maintained, open to the sky. Interferometry gets its own quiet thrill in a radio quiet zone. Sometimes observations combine signals from dishes thousands of kilometers apart. This technique, very long baseline interferometry, requires timekeeping that is as stable as a vow, and careful shipping of recorded data that arrives later to be correlated. When a network of dishes scattered across the Earth points at the same target, the pattern of alignment makes a virtual telescope as big as the planet. The image that results carries sharpness that could resolve tiny structures in faraway objects. The famous images of a black hole's shadow were made this way. not at this dish, but with siblings and cousins of it. The patience required for such work is deep, and the quiet zones are where the individual voices of the instruments are trained to be clean and steady enough to sing together. As evening comes again, you may notice that the idea of not lasting a day here is not an accusation. It is a gentle observation that our modern habits are wired into us in ways we often do not notice. Here, you are asked to notice. You are asked to set down one habit and pick up another, to move your attention from a stream of quick notices to a slow river of patient listening. The trade is not a loss. It is a kind of gain that you feel in your body first, and then in your mind when thinking slows to the pace of careful measurement and time spends itself more generously. Still awake? Comment the secret word nebula. Late at night, a different kind of observing is done. The dish points low toward the horizon to collect signals that have traveled through a thick slice of atmosphere. Measurements of absorption lines in the atmosphere itself are made for calibration and also for the sake of knowing our own sky, the radio reflections from meteors streaking through the upper atmosphere come through in brief, pretty arcs in the spectrograms, delicate trails like handwriting. Sometimes, a project looks at radio emission from lightning with specialized instruments, measuring the way the atmosphere itself becomes a transmitter for a moment that is both brief and big. The quiet zone hears these things because it hears everything at those frequencies, but it has a way of holding them gently, not as interruptions, but as part of the nightly storyline. Imagine a quilt stitched from the logs of this place. Each square a night, each rectangle a day, the patterns would be repeated, but not identical. The observations of hydrogen here, a steady line in blue, the pulsar project there, a little ladder of spikes. A night where a microwave oven was left on in a break room and made a little plateau, politely corrected the next day. A sequence where a new receiver brought the noise temperature down by a few degrees Kelvin, celebrated with rapt attention and a tray of scones someone brought from a bakery in town. The quilt grows over years. It warms those who come later with a sense of continuity and of shared purpose that is not dramatic, but deeply satisfying. The people who work in this valley have other lives as well. They play music. They hike on trails that are as quiet as their labs. They teach. They volunteer in schools where students bring questions about stars and feel their world open. They like tools in their hands and puzzles in their minds. They can tell a story about the first time they heard the hydrogen line themselves in data, the first time they watched a noisy spectrum flatten itself out with integration, the first time they caught a fast radio burst. They remember those nights not as fireworks, but as good meals, nourishing and slow. On some days, visitors who come to learn are shown how to build simple receivers. They connect a small antenna to a software-defined radio and see the spectrum on a laptop screen. Even in the quiet zone, the lower bands show life. The distant glow of broadcast, faint upon faint, is as beautiful as the night sky is to a city dweller whose eyes must adjust longer. The students learn to set a narrow band, to watch a single channel, and learn its language. They learn to leave headroom in the input stages, to tether their laptop with a cable rather than a wireless link, to shield their devices with foil for fun and see the difference it makes. These exercises are gentle, practical, and they sink in. Even if the students go back to loud places, they will carry the memory of a gentle discipline, and they will understand a bit more about how pervasive and subtle the world's invisible waves are. The valley changes through seasons. Spring is windy and bright, with birds cutting arcs above the dish. Summer is green and warm, with evenings that stretch. Autumn is crisp and gold, with air that smells like leaves. Winter is bare and blue-shadowed. Each season has its own comfort in the quiet. In spring, when storms pass and lightning clears, the spectrum feels like a cleaned window. In summer, the late-night hours feel abundant, long stretches of dark like long chapters in an old novel. In autumn, the angle of the sun makes the dish's structure cast long, delicate shadows of filigree on the ground. In winter, the stars feel closer, their steady light a counterpoint to the warm brightness of the control room. Imagine choosing to spend a day here as an experiment in your own life. You wake without an alarm because the sky is already pale. You dress in soft clothes, a sweater, comfortable shoes. You put your phone on airplane mode and leave it on a shelf. You walk to the cafeteria and have something simple. You sit and watch the dish move. You visit the control room and listen to the hum of fans that are themselves quiet as a promise. You ask small questions with your eyes that are answered in gentle explanations that make even complex things feel accessible. You sit in the library and read a paper about a molecular cloud. You look at a map of the quiet zone and trace the lines that define where certain devices are watched more carefully. You walk along a fence line and feel the sun on your face. You are not bored. You are rested. You are surprised that the day has passed so easily without the usual hurry. You sleep better that night than you have in a while. In the broader world, spectrum is a shared resource. There are people who coordinate it at levels that go beyond the valley. People who think of orbits and band plans and international agreements. The blessings of those agreements reach into the valley as a light touch. Protected bands for radio astronomy are like nesting sites kept free of disturbance. Not every need can be met perfectly, but the existence of protection allows the quiet to flourish. When new technologies arrive, such as satellites with phased array antennas that can steer beams electronically, the Valley's team opens their notebooks and starts drawing what sharing might look like. The diagrams include gentle arcs and bands and notes in careful handwriting. Cooperation follows, and in the end, the sky remains open to listening. Imagine now the sound of rain on the roof of the control building. It is a soft patter, not a pounding. At some frequencies, the rain adds a veil. The observers switch to tasks that are comfortable under that veil, perhaps tests of equipment, perhaps an observation of a bright source that does not need perfect conditions. Someone puts on a kettle, the windows fog a little and are cleared with a sleeve. The day that would have felt wasted elsewhere feels simply different here. There is no rush to extract maximum output from hours. There is a sense that the sky has moods and that you live inside those moods, not against them. At midnight after rain, the world smells clean and faintly metallic. The fresh-washed surfaces of handrails and doors reflect the weak light. The path to the dish is wet in places that reflect the stars with tiny hints. The dish tilts. The building is warm again. A new target is up and the schedule resumes. The night is long, but not long enough when you are in a rhythm. The spectrum is clean with occasional thin scratches where satellites pass. The software that excises those lines does its job with the confidence built over many such nights. The logs are meticulous and might seem dry from the outside. Inside them there is beauty in the regularity of entries, the slow accumulation of a large picture painted by many small strokes. Sometimes visiting writers come to the valley to feel the quiet. They have their own ways of listening, their own frequencies of attention. They walk and stop and walk again. They put their palms on the dish's lower beams and feel the cold. They write about the experience not as a spectacular event, but as a day when being present was enough. They notice that food tastes different when you are not eating in a hurry. They notice that a swivel chair in the control room becomes an instrument of comfort when you are moving slowly. They notice that the quiet worn by people here is not heavy, but loose and warm, like a soft scarf. Imagine a remote corner of the grounds where a small hut houses a test instrument. The hut has simple insulation. Inside, an experiment runs quietly, listening at a frequency band where the universe is thought to have a special signature from a time when the first stars turned on. The measurement is difficult, not loud. The signal sought is a tiny dip in a broad curve buried under a foreground that is hundreds of times brighter. The experimenter's work is like trying to hear the pause between two breaths in a room where a fan runs. They model the fan. They understand its harmonics. They learn the room. Slowly, the pause becomes visible. Over months and then years, the pause is described precisely enough that a paper can be written. The writing is careful. The words present the result with courtesy and with each potential caveat laid gently on the page so that others can judge. The experimenters are proud, not in a way that aggrandizes, but in the way you are proud to have kept a plant alive and thriving for several seasons. The gentle restrictions of the radio quiet zone extend into the nights at home as well. In houses near the telescope, people have habits. They turn off lights not only to save energy, but to keep a different kind of quiet. They enjoy the way stars look when the night is dark. They have gardens that are tended in the late afternoon when the radio day is winding down. They keep radios that listen rather than transmit, and they enjoy hearing distant stations that bounce off the ionosphere at twilight. Not loudly, but clearly enough to remind them that the air above is always a sea. Children there learn that their town is special in a way that is gentle. They learn to write their school reports about galaxies with a sense that those are not abstract subjects. Imagine you are watching from far away on a screen in a room that has its own noises. You can let those noises recede as you borrow the valley's quiet. You are invited to breathe more slowly. You are invited to let your mind rest in the idea that the universe is speaking all the time in waves, and that we can listen if we make a quiet place. You're invited to think about the difference between quiet that is forced and quiet that is chosen, and to feel your body lean more easily into the latter. The valley shows that discipline can be soft. It can feel like a decision to sit by a stream, not like being told to stand at attention. In this quiet, you learn to respect levels that would be meaningless elsewhere. A microwatt matters. A tiny leak from a cable matters. A poorly grounded shield matters. The satisfaction in fixing such things is keen. It is like adjusting the tension on a string until the note is true. Engineers who work here have an ear for numbers the way a musician has an ear for pitch. The numbers tell them when the room is right. They can walk into a lab and feel in their bones that a power supply is too close to an amplifier, not because they hear it, but because experience maps a quiet geometry in their minds. They move the supply a hand's breadth, and a problem that would later be a report never appears. Their work is preventive medicine for signals. The sunrise on another day finds frost glinting on the dish's edges, tiny crystals that evaporate softly when touched by sunlight. The dish moves through a calibration run that is by now muscle memory for the team. The first observation of the day is a check on a stable source. The plot looks like yesterday's, with small differences that tell the team that everything is alive and not frozen in a false sameness. The valley warms, the birds move in small flocks. A light contrail of a high aircraft crosses the sky in silence, its engines a rumor too distant to trouble the receivers. Behind the scenes, software hums along. Data pipelines are adaptable. They can handle a nocturnal flood of bits or a lazy daytime trickle. They mark files with times that carry the authority of that hydrogen maser, and they stamp them with observatory codes that place them onto global maps of science as surely as coordinates place a picnic blanket in a park. Adjectives like reliable and robust seem bland until you think of what they mean here. They mean that the night's work will be known next year because the bits will be visited often and will still be in their place, and their meaning will not have been lost to a bit flip. The people who lead in quiet zones know that their work will be easier if their habits seep into the bodies and the minds of those who work with them. They create routines that are comfortable. They create spaces that are calm. They write checklists that are short and respectful. They create signage that is friendly but clear. They buy pencils because pens can sometimes pick up static pops, and pencils are smooth. They choose chairs that do not squeak. They place rugs where footsteps might echo. They choose paints that do not shed static. They care for the small things because those small things add up to a feeling that is restful. Sometimes, in the middle of a day, a train passes on tracks that run far from the observatory. The sound floats in. The train does not speak at the frequencies the dish cares about, but it becomes a market of time. The people in the control room glance up from their screens and look out at the window without speaking. They listen to the train for the pleasure of it, and then, when it is gone, they return to their plots, their lines and peaks and noise floors and gentle slopes. It is a reminder that the valley is part of a larger world, and that the quiet is not isolation, but a choice about how to share the space. On the borders of the quiet zones, there are towns and cities where wireless life goes on in its bright, busy way. The contrast is not a war, it is a tapestry. Most of the world needs fast links and buzzing networks. A few places need to be quiet. Each serves a need that is real and human. The fact that the quiet zones exist is a sign that the world can make places for different kinds of attention. Not every road needs to be a highway. Some can be a lane with hedges and a view of a field where everything important is small. Imagine now a night when you are the observer. You took a short training. You learned how to bring the dish to a safe stop and how to call an engineer if a light on the panel turns yellow in a certain way. You learned to read the weather forecast with an eye for wind. You learned to let the system take care of pointing and tracking while you care for logging and noting. You learned how to coax a script into starting and stopping gracefully. The night is yours. You are calm. You are not called to do anything dramatic. You are called to sit and attend and allow. The data flow looks steady. The scripts are chatty in a polite way. They tell you what they will do next before they do it. You sip tea and you think about very little. As dawn approaches, the data for the night is archived. The telescope goes into a standby state. It points to a known safe position. The screens dim. The building is cleaned by someone who moves quietly with a cart that has wheels that have been chosen for their lack of squeak. The floor smells faintly of soap. The door is propped open for a minute to let in the early air, then closed gently. People step out and stretch. They talk low and smile. A new day begins, not with a trumpet, but with a soft bell in the mind. The idea that you would not last a day in the radio quiet zone is not a test you must pass. It is a way of noticing how tightly woven the modern pattern of constant connection has become. When you imagine yourself here, you can let threads loosen. You can allow a different fabric to hold you for a while. You can imagine carrying a piece of this quiet back to your home. Perhaps you will mute notifications more often. Perhaps you will choose a wired connection where you can, not because it is required, but because it feels restful. Perhaps you will step outside at night and listen, even if what you hear is traffic and people, and you will know that above that, there is always a broader quiet that carries signals older than our species. Some afternoons are devoted to education. Teachers visit from nearby schools. They are shown the difference between a spectrum filled with human signals and one that is mostly natural. They are shown how microwaves leak if the door is bent, using a safe demonstration and a receiver that makes signals visible as a graph. The teachers laugh and lean toward the graph the way people lean toward a fireplace. They talk about how they will explain this to their students without making it too complex. They understand now that science has a place that is built for it, a place where the slow patience of instruments is respected by the world around them. An engineer who works at the quiet zone dreams in diagrams. Their notebooks are full of sketches of boxes and arrows and notes like, "Do not forget feed line shield continuity." The drawings are neat and calm in their way. They are not art in the usual sense, but they are precise and give pleasure. Each box and arrow tells a story of a signal passing through a system that treats it with kindness. The engineer has a favorite connector brand. They know how a certain solder melts. They know how to brace a cable so that it does not tug on a sensitive joint. Their hands move with confidence built over thousands of moves like these. They find joy in making the path from sky to bit as smooth as it can be. An astronomer who uses the data from this telescope sits at a desk in a faraway city. They are not in the valley, but they carry it with them. They look at the watercolors of spectrograms, at plots of signal strength that look like hills. They write code that fits lines in ways that are gently flexible. They consider how to tell a story about their result that will be as calm as their figures. They choose words that are measured. They give credit to the people in the valley who collected the data at 3 in the morning. They have a photograph of the dish pinned to a corkboard above their desk. When work is heavy, they look at it and breathe. In late spring, there is a day when the sky is washed clear by a front, and in the distance, The hills stand out with greater definition. People notice this in a quiet zone more than elsewhere. Visibility doesn't change the radio spectrum, but it changes attitude. There is a feeling of being able to see far that accompanies the feeling of being able to hear faintly. The day's observations feel crisp. Calibration curves look well behaved. The dish moves to a rare target, only accessible at a certain time of year at the right time of night. And the team smiles at the timing, as one smiles when a familiar train arrives on time. Philosophy sometimes wanders into the quiet. People ask each other lightly why they are drawn to such calm. No one becomes dramatic. The conversation remains grounded. People say that here, the work feels like a conversation with the universe that does not require a loud voice. They say that here, you can be modest and still feel part of something big. They say that the quiet helps them remember how to be gentle with themselves, which makes it easier to be gentle with others. They say that the world's loud work and the world's quiet work each need spaces. Imagine closing your eyes again and picturing the dish, its graceful curves, its small steps as it adjusts. Remember the hum of the cryo-coolers, steady and smooth. Remember the sound of shoes on an industrial floor. Remember the smell of warm electronics, a scent that is not sharp but present. Remember the way the grass moved in waves. Remember the way a spectrum changes when a known source enters the beam. These are sensory things, not abstracts, and they make the idea of a quiet zone feel like a place you can return to in your imagination, which is a restful thought. Night again. The valley's darkness is a soft blanket. Stars nestle in it. The dish moves, data flows. The logbook is open to a new page. The date is written at the top, and the pen moves left to right. The letters are neat, and there is space between entries. The ink dries quickly in the dry air. A small stain on the paper recalls a previous night's tea, and it makes the page feel lived in. When you read later, you will remember a joke told softly that made someone laugh without disturbing the room. Late night becomes early morning. The hydrogen maser holds time steady. The signals of pulsars arrive as they always have. The operators are calm. The dish rests when needed. The valley remains quiet. Breath by breath, hour by hour, the work is done. When you open your eyes in your room far from this valley, you can bring a bit of it with you. You can decide that for a few minutes the room is a radio quiet zone. You can put your device aside. You can listen for small sounds. You can let your mind rest on the picture of that dish. You can imagine that the universe is talking and that your job is to listen, not to respond. You can fall asleep with that idea, safe and comfortable, as if under a warm quilt of stars. For those who find comfort in this kind of gentle science, I hope you feel a little more at ease now. If you would like more, please like this video and subscribe so we can keep releasing calm journeys like this as often as we do. The playlist in the description is ready to keep you company as you drift. Wherever you are, I wish you a quiet night, a soft pillow, and good rest.